Go ahead, Ishan.
So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be presenting here my presentation regarding Holonic architecture. So, every one of us knows what Holon is, as we are studying, as we often talk about the integral theory and spiral dynamics. So, if I iterate upon Holon, a Holon is something that is a whole in itself and a part of a larger whole. And here I am discussing the Holonic architecture. The Holonic architecture, which is the foundational understanding of how everything in the universe is hierarchically organized within itself. So, Holonic architecture describes the way in which everything in the universe intelligently organizes itself and then efficiently evolves into an hierarchical pattern, and it can be seen in the nature, as we see from the way atoms evolve. And atoms had their own configuration. They have the electrons, protons, neutrons, and its various configurations and types. And that atoms evolve into molecules, and then molecules have their own configuration and types. And suddenly, when the molecules were experimenting with themselves, they found a certain type of molecular composition, what we know as RNA and DNA, and they then resulted in cellular life form. Then those molecules, a bunch of molecules, they intelligently organized themselves in a harmonious pattern, and that resulted in a cellular life form, the prokaryotic cell that we know of. And then the entire chain of life as we know it, from prokaryotic cell to eukaryotic cells and so on, it is based on the foundational architecture of Holon. The Holon, which is a fractal holographic image of the reality itself. It is like a seed of life. It is the seed of life embedded in everything that we see all around us. And that architecture is the foundational building block of everything in the entire universe. So I would be talking about the Holonic architecture here, and the various research that I have done regarding it, and the various nuances involved in the Holons. So if I begin, so we know about the various models that we study, like spiral dynamics, integral theory, and we ask what stage a particular person is. That what is the stage of a culture? What is a stage of an organization? And there are static topologies. They cannot explain to stalled practitioner what a structural friction is, or what is the phase transition. How can one transition from one stage to another, and what are the internal inefficiencies within oneself at any stage. And here I am working on this Holon architecture, and I call this entire project Holon OS, Holo OS, Holon Operating System. So it asks what the system is doing. So it treats every Holon, every individual, every organization, or every culture as a system. So it is like systems, and derived from the systems theory, applications of systems theory. It asks what the system is doing. It tracks the continuous intraholonic state, means what is happening within the holon, what is happening outside the holon, and what is happening in the larger holon itself. And this is this entire process of like scales evolving into scales. So atoms, they evolve into molecules, and that is jump of a scale in evolutionary jumping. And then the collection of atoms forms the galaxies, the collection of molecules form planets, and collection of molecules evolve into cells, and the collection of cells formed the Gaia system that we see as the life on Earth and other life, full life planets that supports life. And this is an entire metabolic system. The key thing is that it is an entire metabolic system. As we understand the stage theory usually labels people as a static snapshot, as someone who is like either a black and white descriptions of a person that is like either is green or is blue or is red. It cannot elaborately explain the metabolism going on within the individual structure or consciousness or its stage of development. across all dimensions. So this here is the entire systems theory level understanding of the entire metabolic state of a holon. And here, what happens is that the traditional models like collapse reality into a vertical axis. And here, what we are doing is like it is like merging a cal map, like all quadrants with the stages, and having that metabolic understanding with that. And that adds a new dimension to the way we perceive the stages. So if we multiply the permutation combination, it can reach out to like 130,000 combinations, but it is fairly simple to understand once you get the basics. So in the linear model, what is happening is that an engine is running, the two distinct modalities of time. There is one is the continuous processing that is going on within ourselves. We are constantly processing, that experience that is happening to us in this moment and transmuting that experience into something that can help us, decide what to do in the next moment. And similarly, there is a discontinuous transition. There is this engine redesigning itself. Like I am redesigning my own trajectory. In this moment, if I make a choice, it can literally create a butterfly effect of a new trajectory of my own life. So similarly, every holon has two main process, two main systems. One is the lesser cycle. Lesser cycle, it means, for instance, an individual or an organization is operating at orange as we know it. Then all the levels from orange and below comes in its lesser cycle. It means that it has all of those components, and within that lesser cycle, it has to process, digest, and ingest incoming through that lens, through that framework. And then there is the greater cycle. It means that the orange entity that it is going outside into the world towards a certain trajectory in the lower right quadrant in the system's reality. And within that system's reality, that holon, that entity, dictates its own trajectory, transforms its own trajectory, and redirects itself in its own trajectory. So there is these nuances, within a holon that we usually do not, fathom. We do not articulate itself when we ask ourselves that what is the stage of a current, entity, what is the stage of a current organization, and so on. So if we move on toward articulating what the lesser cycle here means, so the lesser cycle is composed of 4 components. So these 4 components are based on a metaphysical and ontological framework called as the law of one. So within the law of one, there is an understanding of the archetypal mind. So the archetypal mind is understanding of from that spiritual framework that how the logos that created this universe had created all of the the foundational building block of reality. And this I has implemented into the understanding of holons with the quadrants and stages to develop this Holon OS, the research project that I'm working on. So to understand it, there are basically 2 main components. So if I go on to the whiteboard, can you see the whiteboard?
Yes, we can see it.
But it needs to be sized maybe so that we can actually see some of the.
Can you?
Or are you going to draw stuff on it?
Sean, can
Yep,
you?
I would be drawing stuff on
Can
it.
you put up the full
Okay,
screen?
fine.
So there are two main components here. One is the matrix and another is the potentiator. So in the science of consciousness, like if I call it everything the ground unconscious. So if we talk about the understandings of Carl Jung and the various psychological understanding that dissects the consciousness, there is the ground unconscious. Ground unconscious means the root of everything, the ground of everything. And within there are 2 segregations here. One segregation is the submergent unconscious. or we know it as subconscious mind. And on the other hand, there is this emergent unconscious. And this is a thing which traditional psychology does not cover at all. This is one of the most important aspects of the understanding of psychology that has not been covered by the developmental theories, and not developmental theories cover it to some extent, but the psychological theories and the psychotherapy does not cover it at all. So the thing that here I'm working on is to shed light onto this dynamics. So the matrix is what is actualized by any holon. So any holon, considering it like the holon is on the contact boundary. So a holon stage of development includes magenta, red, and magenta, red, amber, blue, and orange. So consider for a fact that this is the orange stage. And beyond orange, what happens is that there is green, turquoise, and there is, the higher stages that comes up, third tier, coral, and violet. And what is happening is that the submergent, the matrix, is the actualized state of consciousness of that holon. And potentiator is the emergent that has not yet actualized, but is there lying dormant as the attractor field. The attractor field is like how the atoms, the configurations of atoms has the entire periodic table, of the complexity of atoms. So does the levels of development. Any individual on this planet will fit into one or another attractor field of their own stage of development. And this is where this, entire field comes in. Here, what is interesting to see is that there is an entire metabolic cycle going on. And this is called lesser cycle. And this is one of the most interesting things that we can know to understand both our evolution and personal healing at all scales, from mind and body. This principle applies on both scales. So what is happening here is that matrix is our existent reality, and potentiator is our, the potentials that we have that have not been, tapped into, and the unconscious, the emergent unconscious that can emerge when we lead into that direction. And what happens is that the potentiator sends catalyst to the matrix, from the unconscious, we receive a catalyst. And this is a critical component of the lesser cycle. And what happens is that a catalyst comes into a matrix, and what the matrix does, a matrix digests it, like a digestion system. Matrix digests it and converts it into experience. And it converts it into experience. And what happens is that that experience goes into the potentiator. And then that potentiator has its own digestion cycle. It digests experience to generate catalyst. So if I explain it in simple terms, what happens is that we are living in a life and we receive lessons of some sort, experience of some sort, sufferings of some sort, challenges of some sorts. And those are the catalysts that we are receiving from the potentiator of our ground unconscious, those things that fit to our own tendencies, our own configurations. And that is received by the matrix, our subconscious, and that is digested by it. Those aspects that are not digested properly, sometimes you feel constipation and your digestion system does not work. Similarly, it happens with the consciousness, the structures of consciousness. Those catalysts that are not processed efficiently, those unprocessed catalysts becomes the trauma, becomes the illness, becomes the disease. Trauma and disease. So entire psychotherapy focuses on this aspect of trauma and disease, of how the unprocessed catalyst within our consciousness or mind, mental structures, remains unprocessed, becomes a psychological shadow, and creates the kinds of problems that we have experienced in life: emotional traumas, relationship issues, financial issues, lack of purpose, whatsoever, all those imbalances. And within the matrix, there is an entire array of different understandings that I would not go into detail regarding the polarity that mind has, which we might have another session on. But to give you a preview regarding this is what is happening. And on the other scale, what is happening is that the thing that is not covered is the opposite spectrum of digestion issues across the potentiator, across the emergent axis. Because what we are covering is we are covering healing. We are treating like healing is everything. Like psychology usually covers that, healing your wounds, embracing ourselves, self-love, self-care. But it does not take into account the evolution, the importance of evolution, the importance of tapping our latent potential, becoming the most whole we can be, becoming what we are meant to be. So that part is latent evolution is not addressed, and this is what I address as the golden shadow that we know of. Usually, golden shadow is known as we project our qualities onto other people. But here it is more technical in this understanding, that it is there in the latent emergent aspect. So there you even if you are at orange, there can be shadows in your green, there can be shadows in your turquoise, which are preventing you from evolving into higher stages. This is here what it means. So this is applicable across all the quadrants, across the upper left, or across the upper right, across the lower left in the cultures, and across the lower right in the systems, organizations. And this is the, in simple articulation of the lesser cycle. And this lesser cycle, it creates an identity of an individual. This creates an identity of an individual that I am this, and this is what is happening within myself. And this identity is also known as the another archetype in the greater cycle that we will cover on. Significator. So this is the entire loop. So there is this matrix generation, that catalyst goes into the matrix, and then it is digested into the experience. So the matrix acts as the current state organizer. It organizes the current state and digesting the catalyst into experience. And there is the loop B, where the experience reaches the potentiator, and the potentiator generates the catalyst. It generates the catalyst suitable for us so that we can evolve into the biggest, highest, wholest version that we can be. And it acts as a latent state generator. It acts, so the matrix acts as the current state generator, organizer, and the potentiator act as the latent state generator, which metabolizes the experience into a refined future catalyst. And then there is the greater cycle. So this is the microcosm of the consciousness. The lesser cycle was the microcosm of the consciousness, and the greater cycle is the macrocosm of the consciousness. So it is what we can call destiny, or our whole the path of life that led us for the entire incarnation, or so on. So what happens is that just like the loop that we have experienced here, just like this loop of digestions happening in matrix and potentiator, there is a loop happening in the larger cycle of reality. There is the significator, and significator acts like a matrix. And on the other hand, there is the great way. Great way. So if I convert it into simpler terms, it is the individual quadrants. It is the individual quadrant of the entity, and it is the collective quadrant. It is the lower left and lower right quadrant. It is the container in which we experience our life. It is the entire reality in which we are experiencing ourselves. So we as an individual significator is experiencing the reality in the great way. And what happens is that there is the same kind of dynamics that is happening here. And that dynamics is the significator makes a choice. So the choice goes into significator. And significator sends transformation here. So the two archetypes that are here in happening in the greater cycle are significator, great way, and interacting with the choice and the transformation. So significator makes a choice within the great way and it has its transformation. And what happens in this process is that we make choices and that dictates our trajectory of life. And this is where the trajectory of life is happening. So within the microcosm, what is happening is that there is this internal metabolism that is happening. It is the Goldilocks zone of life. So if we see the planets, we are seeing life on the Earth. It is the Goldilocks zone that created the life on Earth. So this is what has been happening in the Goldilocks zone. And this is how we become human, because all the Holons organized itself in the Goldilocks zone. That creates an evolutionary pattern. If a Holon stays in a Goldilocks zone, it heals itself, it evolves itself, and it goes on into the evolutionary trajectory, transcend and include across the rungs of evolutionary trajectory that we know of. However, if a Holon does not operate on Goldilocks zone, it gets into regression. Its feedback loop breaks. It is like your digestive system failing. It is like your heart stopping. It is like your mind stops working. You cannot understand, you cannot process, and you constantly go into a decline. This is what happens when a planet leaves out of a Goldilocks zone, when an individual leaves out of a place where it has sustenance and where any kind of Holon goes out of stability. This is where the stability is. Stability happens due to the internal metabolic state. That is the lesser cycle for any Holon. And this is the generalized pattern that is applicable to all Holons across all scales. It happens at the atomic scale, it happens at the cellular scale, it happens at the humanistic scale, at the organizational scale. This internal metabolic state that depicts the Goldilocks zone. Goldilocks zone has a formula, and that is there in all Holons. Whereas the greater cycle has another metric. It has the metric of polarization. Polarization here means a certain trajectory. It means a certain direction. It means a telos, a teleological direction. So every Holon has a teleological direction. So a certain carbon compound reaches towards a compound of certain valency so that it can create organic compounds. Sodium compound reaches more towards chlorine and it creates salt. So there is a certain valency, a certain push and pull between them. Similarly, all Holons have their push and pull. An amoeba reaches over towards bacteria to eat it. That is a pull. An animal hunts for prey. That is a pull. Man get to earn money for its survival. That is a pull. So everything is a pull, and that pull is polarization, and that polarization is is the greater cycle. It is like the larger trajectory of a Holon, of where it is going in the collective system, in the collective reality. So the accumulated experience from the continuous engine pressurizes the significator. The engine feeds the identity, and then there is the downward rewrite. So there is the greater cycle upward, and there is the lesser cycle, and there is this interaction between both of them. There is the upward interaction that the experience from the lesser cycle goes into the significator, and the engine feeds the identity, the significator's identity. It feeds the experience, feeds that. And from the greater cycle, what happens is that the transformation executes a downward rewrite. So the transformation that is happening in the significator when it is making choices, when you're making choices, your transformation rewrites your whole identity whatever you are experiencing, and the entire metabolism shift because of the choices you are making. And this is what the entire breathing system of the two great cycles is happening here. So there is this metric for the Goldilocks zone. So the Goldilocks zone, it is like a mathematical formula. So like I can just recite it for a general understanding of it. So the Goldilocks zone, it is 100 into the matrix and potentiators digestive efficiency multiplied by the horizontal and vertical drive balance. So the horizontal and vertical drive balance is something that happens at the contact boundary. So at the contact boundary, what happens is that every holon has two drives, two kinds of major drives. One are the vertical drives and another is the horizontal drives. And the health of holon is described by how the digestive process between the metabolisms of the lesser cycle and the drives of the holon. So these dictate the health of a holon. So if I describe in short, if a holon loses its agency, when a holon has a pathology in its agency, it becomes isolated. And when a holon is more in communion, it is like trying to become a part of a larger whole, it is healthy. And when it becomes too much of a part of a whole that it disintegrates, it dissociates, and this is a pathology here. So there is pathology in all the drives of holons. And similarly, in the vertical drive, these are the horizontal drives that happen at the same scale. And these are the vertical drives where the eros is the holon's tendency to transcend, to evolve into the new stages, to move beyond its own boundaries, to fly, to have wings. And its pathology is phobos. It means fear of transcendence. And on the opposite spectrum, there is this tendency of a holon to embrace the lower holons, whether it is the lower stages within myself or lower stages that I see all around the world, to embrace them, to care for them, like what we see the green dust, but in a healthy pattern. So that agape has a pathology called thanatos. It means regression into the death. In other words, regression into the death. It means I am caring for the other stages too much that I have regressed myself to their stages. So it is that pathology. So this is the entire drives, and these drives occur at the contact boundary where matrix and potentiator interact with each other. And this is where if a matrix, if a holon at orange stage has a drive to evolve into the green stage, but does not have the drive to integrate the lower stages, it would become capitalistic. It will ruin the well-being of others. It would just want money and use Machiavellian practices. But if the holon has a green stage but does not have the tendency to evolve, it would care for the other minorities so much that it would regress to their stages. It would even become red. And this is what is happening with the pathologies in the drives. And these drives are the indicators when there is metabolic imbalance within the lesser cycle. The entire metabolic imbalance within the lesser cycle is easily understood and identified by articulating the drives of any holons. So there is this entire formula for the Goldilocks matrix, that is the balance of the lesser cycle, the health of the lesser cycle. And then there is the quantifying the maturity, that is the polarization metric. It is the momentum at which a particular holon is transcending into the evolutionary trajectory. And this is dictated by the significant and great way, phase change efficiencies, or how it changes its phases, and its efficiency in changing its phases. So this is where that directional commitment magnitude, it is the factor that is involved in polarization. So it is quantifying maturity here. So what is happening is that the static models fails entirely when we see upon those static models that we know of, because a holon can achieve a total metabolic balance. We can see that a certain holon is totally healthy from the outside. We can see a certain person is correctly embodying orange characteristics. It is achieving and it is doing everything, but it's shadow integration, but it does not have any directional commitment. It does not have any evolutionary momentum. It just stays where it is at. The orange stays where it is at without having any will, any direction to evolve into the higher stages, evolve into the directional trajectory, to make choices. That is called the sinkhole. So there is entire grid of low Goldilocks zone, high polarization, high Goldilocks zone, high polarization, low Goldilocks zone, low polarization, and high Goldilocks zone and low polarization. So it is like a whole grid, and there is either the Holon burns out because it has direction but not balance, or it has it has both things low. It has the Goldilocks zone. It does not have a Goldilocks zone balance. Its metabolisms break down. It does not can maintain the health, nor does it have the direction. It stagnates itself. It dies out. And another is the sinkhole. It has high balance but low polarization, and it can deplete too because it does not have a way to make choices, because it does not have a directional trajectory. It does not have the drive. It does not have the momentum. And this is the entire grid that is an entire dimension of understanding holonic reality. And there are shadow mechanics involved in it. So if we understand shadows, if we understand the the way psychology articulates it, so on the shadows, there is dark shadows in the matrix, and there are golden shadows in the potentiator. So consider it like two organs that you have. You have a liver, kidney, lungs, and heart. So you have a submergent unconscious and you have an emergent unconscious. You have your matrix and you have your potentiator. And within those, there are certain structures. Every holon has a structure. The more higher the holon is on the ladder, the more complex its internal structure would be. And to articulate, to understand, to diagnose any holonic structure, we need to understand where a holon is in the larger reality. So if I am understanding the holonic diagnosis of any holon, for example, at amber, so within its matrix, there would be dark shadows and dark addictions within the amber, within red, within magenta, within infrared. There can be dark addictions. There can be dark allergies within each and any of those structures across any quadrants of its existence. So this is an entire systems theory level understanding of breaking down a holonic reality, so that we can articulate it at a deeper level of depth rather than labeling it in black and white terms. And on the opposite end of spectrum, we have this golden addiction and golden allergy. So what happens is that a dark addiction, there is hyper ingestion, that I am getting catalyst. I am addicted to alcohol, and I am just wanting to drink. I am just wanting to drink. I am hyper addicted to a certain catalyst. And what happens is that repeated response, that patterns, that systemic fixation, it is hyper ingestion, because I cannot process that much that I am ingesting. On the other end of the spectrum of dark allergy, there is hypo-ingestion. It means that there is not enough catalyst. I am rejecting catalyst. There is this brittle configuration missing for the necessary developmental foundations. And on the side of potentiator, there is potentiator hyperingestion. It means there is ungrounded experience. There is premature expansion. I do not have the experience to lead to start a business, but I have the ambitions and I lead onto the ground. I get a loan and I waste my money onto some stupid idea. And this is where I can go wrong. So there is this hyperingestion, there is premature expansion, state chasing, and systemic inflation. On the other hand, there is golden allergy. So there is potentiator hypoingestion. It means like refusing emergence. It means refusing the calling, or in other terms, we know it as the Jonah complex. And there are shadow mechanics that are happening at the contact boundary. The contact boundary that I just talked about, the drives, the vertical and horizontal drives, and all of those pathologies. So there are various kinds of pathologies related to that. These are not psychological traits. These are the regulatory valves governing the holon's primary contact boundaries. So there is this lifecycle boundary, where is the eros directs the potential upward, potential upward to higher order organization, and agape stabilizes the ground potential into the active state. It means that the eros evolves into the higher states. If I am on green, I'm evolving into turquoise, I'm evolving into teal. Whereas the agape, it is my drive to, stabilize my lower stages. And then there is this great boundary, that regulates the significator in great way. And what is happening here is that there is an entire cross octave invariance. There is this fractal principle that applies across all of these. So what is happening is that what I am currently researching and what I have yet to research here is so what we have studied till now in all of the developmental sciences, all of the Newtonian sciences, physics, and everything across all the stages. If I have the map here, I do not have that. So let me continue it from there only. Yep. So here are various stages. And what happens is that our understanding becomes a subatomic reality. Our understanding of reality becomes at the subatomic level, or what we also know as quantum mechanics. And it evolves into the cosmological aspects and macrocosm, what we call it, or complex systemic reality. What is lacking in our current understanding is the inclusion of the lower octaves. So this understanding I am pulling in from the law of one and the various spiritual traditions like Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism and various other traditions that explains the nature of mind and consciousness. And here what is happening is that the law of one states that the evolution happens in a series of octaves. Octaves are like the musical notes that repeats in itself, like do, re, mi, la, fa, sa, to. And similarly, that evolution happens across octaves. And we at our present scale are trying to decipher our octave. However, there have been previous octaves that we do not yet know of. And those octaves I am researching on relates to the creation of universe, that how the subtle energy created archetypes. In Hindu mythology, we know of this, idols could be called gods like Shiva, Parvati, and everything, Ganesh. So these are the foundational archetypes that have been formed when the creation happened. These archetypes are not humanistic or personified in nature, but these are the foundation architecture of the holons that we know it. For example, matrix, potentiator, catalyst, and experience, these are the holonic architecture that were devised in the previous octaves that we know very little of. And this is where my research will delve on later. However, for a basic understanding, a causal is the formless quality of consciousness. It is the witness that is experiencing your reality from this moment, from the moment you were born, and to the moment you will die. This is the single truth that will remain absolute, is your causal consciousness, your witness that is experiencing from your point of view, from your eyes, from your living experience, from your soul. Whereas this subtle is the archetypical aspect, which is your qualities of your being, your soul, your structure of consciousness, your memories, your experiences, your past life experiences, or all those aspects that are not physical but are intangible and are subtle. And then there is this gross physical reality. So all these have this own entire octaves and structure of Holon that I'm tracing back by articulating this architecture of reality. I am articulating how this metabolism happens, and from the subatomic scale, I will trace back what kind of metabolism led to this and how this entire creation happened. And this is what my intention is to do with this entire Holo OS. So there is this cross in it now, validation, transition, integration. And this is, my presentation for today. I will leave it at then. And I would like to open the floor for conversations, discussions, questions, and lots more.
Do we want to continue recording, Sean?
You can pause if you want to keep it, like casual. I don't mind.
I can keep it going for a little bit. So, are there any questions?
Ishan, do you have any prompt questions, like questions that or points you think people should be pondering?
I had that in the mail. Let me check it up.
Sean, are there any?
So if I can, if we can reflect upon is the nature of shadow. So what do we believe a shadow is? So I believe that is a very important question. And what do we believe is the the physics and the science of consciousness can be another question. Like how we believe that the stages evolve and what is the the way in which we can perceive the evolution of stages in a better way. This can be another prompt question.
Josh, you had your hand up again. Did you have another question?
I mean, I would have an answer to or a response to the question, but to the prompt. But we can, if Patricia wants to go, she can go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Patricia.
Okay, thank you. So, first of all, Ishan, thank you so much. Wonderful. Just, I'm literally happy that someone is doing what you're doing. So, thank you for that. And
you're welcome, Patricia.
Yeah, and I guess my question is around the golden shadow, which I hadn't seen. I don't quite remember what you said about it. What I've experienced is that one of my teachers said that we assume shadow is negative, and that shadow really is anything that is not in the light, that is being kept in the dark, and that one of the things that we sometimes keep in the dark is our own skill level. Like we may not be ready to be a speaker, but we actually have that ability, and so we hide it. So I wanted to know if that's part of what the golden shadow represents, or is that something different?
So if I would reflect upon, so before I continue, Paul, there is a strong humming sound coming from your mic. So that is a bit distracting. Paul?
What?
There is a strong humming sound coming from your mic, and it is like quite distracting.
Can you mute Paul?
Perfect. So if I reflect upon the aspect of golden shadow, so the golden shadow, we usually assume what we are is what our consciousness is, what is we have experienced, what is within us. So we assume that the darkness is within that structure that I called matrix. However, we have a lot that we have not processed outside from the world. We are what we experience. We are what we process the experience of. So if I'm living my life, I am processing this moment to moment, and whatever I process, I expand. My light expands. The area of my consciousness of what it can access and interact with expands. Within this aspect, there are two types of shadows. One is within myself, within my own light, there can be darkness. Those darkness that is made up of my own consciousness, that I fragment it out, and that is within myself, and that is split from myself, that we all conventionally know as dark shadow, that we know as those aspects that are split, cut off, our potentials, our skills, those that we have had but we forgot, or we have repressed, or perhaps are negated by some autonomous reactive, nervous system activity, by dysregulation. On the other hand, there is a lot of things that we are unable to process from the exterior reality. So from the outside of the world, if I am not unable to, digest that experience and to my own light, that is another kind of shadow. From my outside of my latent potential, that comes in the golden shadow. So it is different from what conventionally golden shadow means. It is more relevant to what our potential is. So potential, in this my terminology, potential is the attractor field of the stages that you have not yet achieved. If I am on green, then turquoise is my golden shadow because I have not yet achieved it. And in some way, something is blocking my actualization of turquoise in my current experience. And this is where it is understanding that what kind of experience is leading me to that, and what kind of catalyst do I need from my potentiator to evolve into that. So it is the understanding of that entire metabolic loop that I was discussing can help shine light on that.
Thank you. That did clarify my question. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Patrice.
Well, it looks like I'm up. So yeah, I only caught the second half, but I found what I was hearing pretty interesting. And on the concept of the golden shadow, that's really interesting to me. I haven't heard it framed that way. I mean, I've heard of one's shadow and light, or shadow and golden aspect, or gold as they call it, but the golden shadow. And I write a lot about shadow. I'm definitely into a lot of Jungian stuff as well. And
yeah,
I guess that what occurs to me though is so yes, people are pretty quick to say, look, we have a negative shadow. So it's basically something that's hidden, right? But it could be positive. Here's the thing though, are we as pretty egotistical creatures, are we really hiding our good qualities so much? I guess the question is, what proportion would you say is, let's say traditional shadow and golden shadow? I'm not denying the existence of it. I just think if there was some really positive stuff within me, wouldn't I be the first person to bring that out? Like, maybe you could talk a little more about anything relevant to that.
Definitely. So what I'm articulating here, in terms of the goodness that you are describing, is perhaps a goodness of the moral sort that you are describing, a kind of sense of doing the right thing that is good of all people, rather than like doing it for myself and taking care of my own needs. And in my understanding, what distinguishes this understandings of is, like, if you understand the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we know that if a person's needs are fulfilled, what we have seen in the tribal culture is that when they do not have to fear for their security, their safety, they started working with art. They started kneading, they started creating jewelry, they started working with like those various kinds of activities like painting, sculpting, because they evolved from beyond their needs. They do not yet have the need to operate on that scarcity. So similarly, this pattern is evident on all the lines of development, across the moral line, across the identity line, and within the identity. What I believe is that some portion of that remaining stuck in egocentrism is due to the fact that their environment compels them to be opportunistic. They compels them to be in a dog-eat-dog world, because their life has treated them as such. Our society has treated them as such, that they were always knocked down at some corner or other, because like the world is not a good place, to be honest. When you go out, it is a privilege and a luxury to be able to like discuss intellectual things with sophisticated human beings. That is not available to all the people and to all the places. This is what happens when the exterior impacts negatively. And on the other hand, there is those interior choices that an individual can make. Some people choose to be evil. They choose to be, do wrong things. They choose to be bad, even if they have all sorts of resources, as we can see in the capitalistic, era. Those people who just want to hoard everything from them, even if they have, the generations can live easily. Sometimes people want to see other people suffer. It is a kind of choice that they make. So the level of development here, what I see is they have a staggered level of development that makes them able to take a second person perspective. For example, if I am, stabbing a knife with other person, and I am not able to feel that pain that other person is feeling, I do not have empathy. And some people shut off their empathy. They shut it off, consciously or unconsciously. There can be various factors to that. That becomes pathological. And these kinds of pathologies sometimes run generationally, sometimes runs in the family, sometimes runs in the office culture, sometimes runs in the, school environment, any kind of communities. And this also influences individuals. There is a multitude of factors, what I believe in that goodness. However, one always has a choice. Like I have talked about, that there is this entire, lesser cycle that dictates external and internal influences and everything. However, there is this greater cycle, where we can choose. We can, in this moment, if I choose to, take a completely different trajectory, if I choose to become a full-blown environmental activist and, and want to create an impact on the world, to make the world a better place, even if I do not have a means to, live or something, that would, completely change my trajectory, and I would have a different sense of motivation for that. And this is where, things comes in. The choice, and individual has the ability to make a choice. What I believe is that there can be external influences to that, but everyone is free. And this is the level of self-responsibility, what I believe would be there when second tier culture would be, around us, because we would be pushing self-responsibility onto our kids, onto our parents, onto our culture, that you are responsible for your emotional trauma. You are responsible for your, those, your staggered evolution. And we would be thinking in developmental terms. I believe this kind of culture would greatly help, us to see more of goodness within us and others, and, keep on that track. Second tier culture is the way to go.
So would you say that part of the golden shadow is one's potential in terms of, like you were saying before, the next stage that they're maybe on the cusp of?
Yep, golden shadows like that, definitely.
Because when I went to some event years ago when I was first into spiral dynamics, and it was actually at a UU church, Unitarian Universalist church, and they were talking about spiral dynamics. I was like, wow, this is crazy that this place would be discussing this. And they had us fill out kind of a questionnaire, basically to see what stage you were at, more or less. And basically, I can't remember. So yeah, you fill it out, and then basically what everyone did is the questions you ended up answering were not the stage you were at, or your answers that you gave were not the stage you were at. It was actually the next stage. So I resonated towards everything that was sort of turquoise, even though I'm definitely not at turquoise. And that was basically, it was sort of not a trick, but it was sort of like just showing that we are there's a gravitational pull maybe towards where we would like to be, even if we're not there. So maybe that's some golden shadow stuff. Is that possible?
Regarding that assessment, what usually happens is that our cognitive line evolves the first. Our ability to articulate the world all around it is like the horsepower. It is like the raw energy of our consciousness. And people usually articulate the turquoise and second tier first before reaching them. There are certain multitudes of lines, the average of which can compose to lesser or more stage, because you might be turquoise in cognition, but on morals you might be amber, or you can be like a racist person internally. And this is the way things are, because this is a spectrum of various lines. And not only internally, but I believe that your external reality, the trajectory you are living in the life, your life condition, your financial conditions, your partners, your relationships, these also symbolize your current stage. And most of the developmental stages just only incorporate the individual, but I believe that the collective is also a similar kind of assessment that also needs accounting for.
Great, thank you.
It's an interesting comment, because that was exactly where my thought on this went, that it's, it's not just what I am internally, it's all of the pressures of my social groups that tell me that this is a horrible thing, right? And I mean, in some social groups, those pressures today are becoming higher and higher. And so your belonging gets crushed if you notice those polls, right? So I think that's exactly where the answer is, Josh. That it's that bigger Holon, the immediate one that you're embedded in. The reason I raised my hand, Sean, is that there's also, when I see Holon theory, they tend to be entirely embedded within the next level. But there's also the thought of intersections, right? And I haven't thought about this in Holons at all, except that it just popped into my head now. So I'm going to ask. So I have a Holon here, and I have a Holon there, and instead of one being embedded in the other, they're partially connected and embedded in two different, maybe even at the next level, those larger Holons are in conflict, right? And yet it's back to the same thing we were just talking about with Josh, right? That there's that pull within me as a Holon to go here or to go here into a different way. So how do you view that? Is it possible that they get intersected with each other, or how else would you think about that?
The intersection of Holon is something that we already see in the molecular sciences, like sodium chloride, like all the molecular sciences.
Let's dissolve the salt in the water, right? Okay, gotcha. Thank you. That is so helpful for me, because the sodium chloride and the water are still their own Holons, and what's around them is not really. Okay, yeah, thank you. That was a very helpful image for the chemists.
You're welcome.
So where do we take that as far as, once they get entangled, as we know with desalination of water, this is a great example, right? It takes a humongous amount of energy and effort to get salt and water disentangled.
Getting salt and water disentangled. So like salt and water, so we can see it as it is part of larger whole while staying a whole, because the sodium chloride molecule is there within the water. It is not going away, but it is part of a larger whole. It is not going away. It is not dissociating itself. Its atoms and its electrons are not breaking apart into quantum nothingness. It is still there.
And just a thought to leave you with, you're putting equations on it. And for a long time on the psychosocial side, I've noticed that there's a tendency for folks in that realm to want to become physicists, because physicists look down on them as mathematical idiots. And then we'll go downhill from there, right? So And people like you and I that do both numbers and not so number stuff find that a bit strange. But it seems as if bowing to that orange mechanistic idea of putting equations to everything, I'm not sure how I feel about that. In my bright orange history, well, of course you put numbers to everything, right? It just is, but there's something beyond the numbers maybe that the equations don't quite show.
Like cosmologically speaking, like numbers is something that we have, humans have given metric to. On a quantum scale, if you notice, there are no numbers. When you go to the 0 point energy field, it is either zero or infinite. And everything is a variant of that. If you see a holon, we see a holon at a scale, an atom at a scale. But if we zoom in, we see a lot of protons, neutrons, electrons. These are not a single, but we have numbered it as a single holon, a single atom. But if we zoom out, we see another picture. So like the scale and numbers is something that we have quantified to help us in perceiving and articulating it. However, if we are talking about integral methodologies, what I believe is that various schools of thoughts, even if the psychology, even if physics, quantum mechanics, biology, medical sciences, I believe integral must integrate them all to give a holistic understanding of everything.
Including maybe some equations for the folks that need it.
Yes, it is a choice. We can pick and choose among what we are good at. That if I'm good in psychology, I can focus more on those aspects that I'm good at and stitching those pieces of fabric together for myself, and leave the rest till I get mature in that particular line.
Thank you for this, Ishan. It was excellent. This is great work. Keep it up.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ishan. Is my, well, it is buzzing. I've got air conditioning going on, so, but I'll try to move closer to my microphone so it drown it out. Again, thank you very much. Very, very thorough, very detailed, very information rich. I guess one thing, I got a couple questions, but I really liked your static map versus the engine model way of kind of starting out and talking about the process, this holonic process. But I like the way you, in a sense, applied it to, if you will, the deficits of spiral dynamics. Interestingly enough, I have always kind of viewed spiral dynamics in more of an engine model way. If you will, I kind of have tried to really avoid getting caught in, I call it the color trap. Just looking at that, oh wow, look at that neat color. Which color am I? So it seems to me that, if I were to summarize, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, is that this presentation was a good summary of, I'll call it a detailed analysis of adaptability. In other words, what is the mechanics? I mean, by diving into this the way you did, you really gave a thorough covering, an analysis of the mechanics of how a person adapts to circumstances. So I guess I have two questions. One is, in your research, have you seen anything that indicates anything about variations in an individual's overall adaptive capacity? In other words, is it reasonable to think that some people have more adaptive capacity than others? And Or is it just that some people haven't exercised the capacities that they have? And then secondary to that, maybe that's the second question, how does one increase their adaptive capacity?
Like before I could continue, yeah, like I would like to you to mute your mic because like it is like buzzing quite a lot. Perfect. So regarding this typologies, I had not covered in this presentation, but I have been also working on the, researching upon the universal kind of typology that I can derive for the holons. And what I have currently found is that the periodic table, the atomic periodic table was very helpful in helping me identify that how I can find like a universal typology at all scales. And what was the differentiating factor there was valency. Valency, if you know about in chemistry, valency is something that that dictates a reactivity of an element. For example, sodium has a valency of 1. It means that it is highly reactive because that electron is wanting to pair. And chlorine has a lack of single electron to cover its holon, and that is wanting one electron. That I want one electron, that is wanting to pair. That reactivity is like a pull. That is a polarity. It is pushing from inside. And then there are noble gases that are totally unreactive because they have their fill complete. They have their shells complete. And what I have found is that these valencies are these bounding disposition. These are your individual's capacity to bound with the collective, towards the collective quadrant. You're an individual upper left and individual upper right, moving towards the lower left and lower right quadrants. And this is where there is your capacity comes in. There are these types of various kinds of valencies. Like there is like open, there is donor, there is like one is like open, I'm open to receiving. There is kind of donor typologies. There is like sharer, and then there is the closed. And all of these, there are types of typologies that are there on the holons that is like everywhere. And if you see a certain thing that if my internal process is too stabilized, like I've like shown the grid, if my internal process is too stabilized, in chemistry it is like noble gases, that I do not feel the need to do anything. Like those people who do not have the drive to do anything, they are just happy in their comfort zone. They do not have an internal pull. They they lack their entire disposition. And on the other hand, there are certain atoms like carbon that can bond with any elements because they have such kind of adaptability. They have such kind of configuration that they can adapt to anything. So these are some things that typology is something that is like very fixed. Like we need very strong nuclear force to change our typologies, just like we know like in Enneagram and Myers-Briggs. Like these typologies are very strict, and we need to move way out of our comfort zone to be able to change our typology. And it is the same way that is happening at the atomic and at the holonic level. And this is the way which requires some kind of external force if you want to increase your drive towards everything. Eventually it is polarity. In short, if I explain about polarity, everything in your mind is electrical charge, and that electrical charge is something that is driving you towards something. And unless there is a negative and positive charge, you will not be driven. That negative and positive charge is something that an individual develops or it intrinsically has due to his environment, due to lack of something. For the second tier, it is something that the individual is overflowing with. These are the being needs. In the first tier, what is happening? Individual operates on deficiency needs. Like it wants to accept because it has a lack of certain things. I have a lack of security. I have a lack of social needs. I have a lack of self-esteem needs. And it is like deficient. This is why it reaches out. But on second tier, the being is like so overflowing with a capacity that it wants to give to the world its capacities. And this is why it reaches out and it spreads out its own drive. That drive is much more nourishing, much more fulfilling than that basic drive that is, forcing on scarcity, because on scarcity, a person can regress in order to heal itself. But when a person is ascending into, towards, higher stages, towards self-actualizing, towards rediscovering what I can be, rediscovering the potentials that I can, actualize with my beingness, the capacities that I have, that is something very much constructive.
So I guess I'm still a little unclear about, is it fair to say that some people's capacity to adapt, overall capacity, is greater than others or lesser than others? Or is it just more of a case of they haven't been challenged by the circumstances enough to exercise that potential of adaptability?
I would not state that everyone has the same level of potential, because the typology is real. The circumstances and the privilege that one is born with is real. The support that an individual, external support that an individual have, that gives that individual an unfair advantage, is a real thing. That is completely, entire paradigm. However, we have our, this entire freedom that we can increase the efficiency within our digestive process. Just like, if my stomach is ill and I'm having digestive issues, I am of old age, I can start, eating nutritious food, I can start working out, and I can start taking care of myself so that I can get better. Similarly, it is with your, stage of development. In the consciousness, what we have talked about in the matrix, the shadows that causes the decay of an individual, depletion of capacities, is the dark shadows within the matrix. It is what you have experienced throughout your life. What happens is that those unprocessed experience lives inside you. Those experiences you do not want to see, or you just fed up of your life, and you do not want to shed light on yourself, or you do not love yourself enough. You do not see your own worth anything. So these all creates darkness within you, within your own consciousness, within your own being that has lived, 50, 40, 30, 60 years. It creates that within you. And the more that piles up, the more that nervous system dysregulation happens, the more that nervous system dysregulation translates into physical disease. The entire negative feedback loop turns into the physical and mental diseases. This is an entire metabolic loop, and it is real at all scales. This is what happens, that overall degradation happens when a holon disintegrates within itself, and it is true at entire holonic scale.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I have a clear understanding of that. Barbara, you've raised your hand. Go ahead.
Your periodic table gave me a real aha. And this may be helpful, Paul, too. One personally,
Yeah.
if you had asked me yesterday where I would be, well, obviously I'm in the noble. I don't get sucked into anything, but lately I've been getting back into my the groups that neurologically resonate with me. So I work really hard to immerse myself in what I think is healthy green, but there's a neurological disconnect between the fields they create and the fields that are comfortable to me, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so lately I've been working with groups of technologists and scientists who are definitely not on the mainstream of current thinking. And it's amazing how those fields emerge. We're sitting there on a Zoom call and it's like, oh, you need to do this. And do you know so-and-so? I mean, it sounds like a communitarian group, but everybody there belongs on the left side of the spiral. And we can generate fields that that pull us in. And if you were listening to us, you might be very surprised that we're all rugged individualists at soul level, at a Myers-Briggs level, right? And so, Paul, what I'm thinking is part of it is that innate ability, and it's who you bond with. So I can remember I won't mention the name, a famous Myers-Briggs guy telling me that he would teach me to work a room the way he does. And when I finished rolling on the floor laughing, I suddenly realized that it makes no sense for me to try that level of bonding. I need to work a room the way folks with my personality work a room, right? And so I'm thinking one of the reasons that we get arrested, Paul, is that we're in a society that tells us, for example, when I was younger, girls had to be cheerleaders. Well, I mean to tell you, I would have slit my throat before I would have become a cheerleader. And it would never happen, right? And because it's almost neurologically incompatible, I think, for me to do that. But so we're trying to have people change and to develop in ways that just aren't compatible with their innate holonic structure as an entity. And if we can get out of that and get into thinking of ourselves as very personalized, if you're having trouble getting into this we space, there's other ones that are more compatible with your inner vibes that will work to pull you there. So I think also, Paul, one of the things that I had a discussion once with Don was Graves' idea of total cognitive capacity at this moment in your neural development. And they would always say at this moment because brains grow, souls grow, the body can heal itself, as you say so well, Ishan. But where you are now, in a neurophysical sense, may make it impossible for you to grow until you have the healing. And some of that may be physical healing, some of that may be neurological healing, but and it's not that you couldn't ultimately get there, but that you're just stuck because of what has happened to you in your path. And a lot of the things we do to get people out of that are non-useful. So I think that's the other issue that probably Don would like me to have mentioned as well.
Thank you, Barbara. Anybody else?
I was wondering that if we see in the nature this carbon life forms, all around we see other carbon life forms that evolved into we humans, sophisticated humans with we're talking about these stages of development, right now. And what I am thinking is that the Paul's question was made me curious regarding my work in the recent typology, the universal holonic typology, as to what would be the carbon of the typology. What would be a ideal typology that can create a kind of Goldilocks zone that I was working with, a balanced Goldilocks zone that can ensure that even if I age, my heart and my mind and my soul remains young. I still remain full of life. And this is what I would be researching in my ongoing research regarding what kind of typology creates the ideal typology zone or ideal Goldilocks zone, and how we can create our balance towards that, being whatever typology we are on the scale.
Thank you.
There'll probably be different paths for different typology, for different innate. I would have said genetic 20 years ago, but I'll now say for different epigenetic bodies in the physical form and where they come to. There will be different things to pass for your current epigenetic typology, and that gets pretty. But I think we're seeing more and more that is what the little research that's done on it says. For example, and I don't think I saved it. I'll have to look and see. That I saw an article a while ago about men with medical and psychological problems epigenetically passed it on to their kids in their sperm. I mean, we know that what happens to moms can impact babies in utero, right? And I mean, we've known that forever and a day. But that somebody just looked at sperm and their theory was that it's epigenetic. So fathers pass on psycho and physical trauma to their kids through damaged sperm. God, it never ends.
Any other comments, questions? If not, I'll at least stop the recording and we can go on from there.
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah, I'll just be interested one. Sean, you mentioned you were talking about where we can sometimes regression to advance. Now, I'm aware of this idea. I don't know if you know Michael Washburn's idea about, it's sometimes also confusingly for us called biodynamics. He talks about regression in the service of transcendence. And I'm interested yes, that's right. We have to hit what he calls a dynamic ground and go back to the ground, then and then to be able to leap higher. It's a bit like that.
I got it.
Yeah. Jung talks about reculer pour, sauter, recoil or crouch down to jump higher, and things like that. Is this part of what we're having the interaction of the golden shadow and the lesser shadow? Would that be the sort of, in a sense, sometimes maybe something the potential goes into the shadow for a while, maybe to process? Here we're using alchemical things like in Jung's later work as well, ready for that movement on or higher, as we sometimes talk about even in spiral dynamics sometimes.
We say it's spiral dynamics. We don't say linear dynamics, because spiral in itself means like if I'm evolving from one stage to another, I am coming back to lower stages as I am going on to the higher stages. So the spiral dynamics in itself covers that aspect of like we being able to tap all the lower holons as I am evolving to the higher holons of evolutionary complexity. And however, the model that I've covered works with the intra-holonic dynamics that is happening within the holon. Like if we consider an atom has the rings of electron, S, P, D, F. These are like the stages of development. The more higher the stage is, the more rings we have, and the more rings we have, the more electrons those rings would have, and the more electrons those have, the more complexity, the drives, the needs, and we will need to take care of all the rings within our entire atom. If we are at a more complex atom, if I am a uranium, I would have to take care of 4 or 5 rings that I have and all the electrons within it, for that it does not become unstable. This is what happens, and if I want to evolve higher, and there is this entire process with it, because the complexity scales with higher stages, and with higher stages of complexity there is a greater responsibility for maintaining its metabolism, because you are now operating a spaceship rather than a motorbike, and a spaceship requires a lot more control than a motorbike.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.